All right, let's talk one more time about evangelical atheists. Now, a video I put out a couple days ago at this point, I was talking about the type of atheist that's evangelical. And I was asking, the really most important question is, why are they like that? Why? That's really the most interesting, most important question. And that's why I keep saying some of this is politics, some of this is politics, some of this is politics. Because I'm convinced the answer has more to do with politics than anything else. And it's complicated, but I'm pretty sure most of you, once I get this fully fleshed out, I'm pretty sure almost everybody listening to me is going to see exactly what I'm talking about and is going to agree with me. This is pretty obvious. It's just hard to ferret out the truth of what I mean. So let's take a closer look. What atheists usually say. Almost every atheist I can think of says some variation on this as their purported worldview. I want my beliefs to align with the facts. I want to be rational and logical in my decision making. When I have my beliefs, I want them to comport with reality. So I want them to line up with what science says is true. I want them to line up with what sociology says is true, assuming those two things are correct in their assessments, and we can empirically verify them, so they usually are. And then I want my beliefs to correspond directly to reality. I want to predicate my beliefs on what's true and what's knowably true and what's provably true to the best of my ability. Almost every atheist I know would agree to some variation on that. With Aaron Ra, it's a script that he says almost every single time he goes to bat. He's got some variation on the script. At some point I'll memorize the script and I'll tell you exactly what his script is. But it's some variation on that. I want my belief to correspond to the facts. Now, in some cases, so they want to be rational in their approach to life and they want to be reasonable. And they want their beliefs to be in line with reality. In some cases, I would say 30% of the atheists, that belief totally corresponds to their actions in life. In other words, there's no inconsistency with that stated belief, with that stated worldview. Now, that's a rough estimate at the worldview. There's a couple other things that most of them would put in there, but most of them would put that in there. In some cases, I'd say 35%, that stated worldview and that underlying, I want to believe what's true, corresponds directly to their actions. And when it comes to God, most of them also further go, I just don't believe you, Craig. Glad you get so much out of your sky fairy. I don't think it's real. Show me the evidence and maybe I'll believe you, but I don't think there's enough evidence for God. So that's what they'd also back up with the God thing. Correct? That's pretty fair, right? If you got if you're an atheist, you want to elaborate on that a little, give me a full definition, how most atheists would define themselves. I'm perfectly willing to adjust that, fine tune it a little. That's roughly what most atheists would say. Now, 30% of the atheists, that corresponds to their actions note for note perfectly. The person I always bring up as an example is Brett. Pleasure of Doubt. That corresponds almost completely to his actions. He's rational-minded in almost everything he does. He tries to figure out the logical predicate and the facts for things, and that's what he tries to correspond his beliefs to. It's not particularly ideological. You wouldn't expect somebody who announces that as their worldview to be particularly ideological. This is where I'm going with this. Now, there's another type of atheist. It is an evangelical atheist. And that stated belief is also what usually comes out of their mouth when they talk about their beliefs. For example, Aaron Ra. He has a script that says roughly what I just said. But it's totally inconsistent with his actual actions. That's my point. Why is there an evangelical atheist when it totally contradicts what most of them say is their actual worldview? Why? It doesn't follow. It doesn't quite make sense. It's a phenomenon that we sort of take for granted, the militant atheists. Why do they exist? We take it for granted because there's so many of them, right? There's a lot of them, Greg. Yeah, I understand that. Why on earth do they exist at all? Because their actions are totally inconsistent with their stated worldview. I just don't believe you, Craig, but that's not how you act. So let's break it down and take it into the real world. Let's look at examples. So we got 3 examples. The 2 most evangelical atheists I can think of are Aaron Ra and Pine Creek Doug. The reason why I always use Pine Creek Doug as an example is he's really evangelical atheist. He gives no quarter to a Christian when he's having conversations on his channel. Now, where with Pine Creek Doug's, what makes it so completely mysterious is usually when you press an atheist, so why on earth they care that people believe, their religion? Aaron Ra will tell you that it's nonsense and it's dangerous superstition. Then he'll start foaming at the mouth at all the destructive aspects of religion. And then you get him started and wind him up. He'll give you a 20-minute speech on how toxic and destructive religion is. And it's a lot of them is variation on the same thing. It's predicated on superstition, blah, 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 blah. The point is, so the other person who's a quasi-evangelical atheist is Scholar Fiction, by way of example. Now, Scholar Fiction is not quite an evangelical atheist the way these two are. Scholar Fiction's worldview is a lot more consistent with his actions. The things he says he cares about, the things he says he believes, the things that come out of his mouth are consistent with his actions, believe it or not. So Scholar Fiction goes in debates, and when he's in debates, he tries to debunk, dismiss, discredit. He puts on his debunk, dismiss, discredit hat. Aaron Ra and Pine Creek Doug never take off the debunk, dismiss, discredit hat. Never. Never take it off. Scholar Fiction puts it on when he's in debate. Why? He says he wants to win debates. Okay, so it makes sense in that context. When he is on his channel and there are Christians who come on. Now, he's got his objections to Christianity. And as far as I can tell, one of his main go-to objections is when there's the thing that riles him the most is a certain type of hard Calvinist. That's the type of person that he thinks is whatever. That's the one that's a pet peeve of his. So when he has hard Calvinists on his channel, he goes into debunk, dismiss, discredit mode. It's somewhat consistent with what he says he believes. He seems to object to somewhat a lot about Christianity politically. Remember, some of this politics, politically. So he thinks some of these people are some Christians, some of our people, some of my people are dangerous in certain contexts. A lot of them will give you this answer. I have no problem with Christians believing whatever they want as long as they don't try to change our laws, as long as they're not right-wing crackpots. A lot of them will give you that answer. But what's really interesting in the case of the evangelical answer is that it's lip service. It's not true. It doesn't correspond to their actions. So when Pine Creek Doug has a Laura Robinson on his channel, someone whose worldview is kind of internally consistent with his. If you took out things that they believe, they match up right. One big exception. She's a Christian. She believes in a deity, and he doesn't. He can't let that go. That's my point. He can't. Not she can't. He can't. Scholar Fiction doesn't do that. He gets a Christian on that he perceives as a little bit more mellow, not quite such a triggered out lunatic as some of the others, and you will see him put his sword down. I've seen him do it. That's what I would expect from all of them. So, for example, he had Dry Apologist on his channel. Dry Apologist is a little bit of a wussy Christian. Yeah, I know, you are so. He's going to try to duck out. No, I'm not. I'm hardcore like you, Craig. No, you're not. You're a wuss. He's a wussy Christian. Wussy Christian is defined, I define it as wussy. He's a wussy Christian, I promise. As more liberal interpretation of the Bible. Okay, so he thinks some things are allegorical here and there. He does? Yeah, he does. That's so weak, Craig. I told you, he's a bit of a wuss. Yeah, he's kind of a namby-pamby, interprets the Bible in a sort of namby-pamby, middle-of-the-road way. Far more palatable to someone like Scholar Fiction, out of the words out of Scholar Fiction's own mouth. So, when he was on his channel, Scholar Fiction did what I would kind of expect him to do, consistent with what he says his worldview is, put his sword down a little. Started asking questions. Okay, well that's better than the other guys, so why do you think this and what? Put his sword down, as I would expect anybody to do. All right, you're not as triggered out as some of these other people. I don't object to you as much. My sword goes down. Scholar Fiction and Laura Robinson on his channel. I don't think I don't think he'd debate her at all. I don't think he'd get in her face at all. Pretty sure he wouldn't. That's my point. He'd act in a way consistent with his beliefs. He'd go, okay, she's kind of liberal. She's touchy-feely about these things. She's, I don't know, supports these rights and those rights too. So he would give her completely fair hearing, wouldn't pick up a sword at all. Which is what you would expect. Why? Because it's consistent with what they believe. It's consistent with what they say they believe. Mr. Atheist, another case in point. Not a very evangelical atheist, at least in some ways. At least in one clear way. He says, I'm Mr. Gay Rights. That's out of the words of his own mouth. That's really important to me. So when you find a Christian who presents herself as Mrs. Gay Rights, who is God is gray, you would expect he would put his sword down in that particular context and find some sort of kinship with that person, find her some sort of kindred spirit. Why? Because they both really agree on a subject that's near and dear to both of their hearts. That makes complete sense, right? I'm not saying either of them are right or wrong. I'm not saying scholarly fiction is right or wrong. I'm just saying it comports with what it holds. It makes sense. It's consistent with what they say is near and dear to their heart. Almost every atheist I've ever known says, I want to base my beliefs on reality. That's what's near and dear to my heart. The findings of science, the reason why I hold them so valuable is because they are true, because they've been empirically verified, therefore true. Ditto for sociology. The reason why I hold them near and dear to my heart is because I want to believe what's true. I want my beliefs to comport with reality. I don't think any atheist would not agree with that. I think every atheist listening would say that's true. So that's what's near and dear to their heart. In some instances, it is consistent with their behavior. Brett. A couple other atheists here and there. It's consistent with their behavior. Objectively, Dan. The atheist I usually cite as the integrity atheist, the top shelf atheist. With the evangelical atheist that is totally inconsistent with their behavior, that's my point. They say the same thing, they don't mean it. They say the same thing, they don't mean it. When Pine Creek Doug has a wussy Christian on his channel, a la Laura Robinson, a liberal Christian, a more, watered down in their interpretation of the Bible. And Laura Robinson, if you're listening to it, I don't mean, don't get upset. She's going to get upset at me. Last time she got upset. I was sold out to the Holy Spirit as you are, Craig. Fine. Nothing to do with that. I accept that. If you're an on-fire Christian, more power to you. And an on-fire Christian and a wussy Christian at the same time, double more power to you. I think the differentiation that I'm going to start making is between the saints and between the soldiers and the Sunday Christians, because I think that's a better way of parsing this out. Because I don't consider Randall Rouser a wussy, but necessarily, and I'll go into that in another video. I don't consider him a wussy Christian. He's a wussy Christian by belief. He believes some things about the Bible that are like, come on, you've been smoking too much weed, dude. Don't poke out that joint, man. It's all mellow, guys. This part here is allegorical, and this part here doesn't match. It doesn't really matter, dude. It's just about love, bro. It's just about loving your neighbor and stuff, bro. Yeah, it's all hippied out. So you would expect Pine Creek Doug to put his sword down. Never does. When he had Laura Robinson on the show, he doesn't alter his playbook at all. He doesn't stop his playbook. He just shifts it for this new type of person and then runs the same plays. I swear to God. He doesn't alter it at all. He goes, oh, here's a new Christian, a new type of Christian who believes things that I've been saying for a long time. I wish Christians just believe. I hear him say it a bunch of times. I wish Christians weren't so, sold out on believing the Bible is inerrant. I wish the Christians weren't this, that, and the other thing. He finds Christians that aren't this, that, and the other thing, doesn't alter it at all, doesn't gain them any credibility with them. He shifts his playbook, starts running plays on them, same way. Running scams on them, running his plays. Does a stupid envelope scam. You gotta see a stupid envelope scam. It make your head explode. I swear to God, it's the most head exploding thing I've ever seen. He got an envelope. Here, I got this envelope. It's from Jesus. Oh, look at this. Something like that. If the resurrection, I didn't rise from the dead, I don't know. It's so ridiculous. Put it this way. If I had Paul G on my channel, I go, here's an envelope, Paul. It's all fun and games. We're having this conversation. Here's an envelope. And I open it up. Oh, it's from God. God exists, Paul. How does this change your atheism going forward? He'd go, That's what happens. He brings out the envelope scam. The envelope scam is absurd. He thinks it's not a scam. It's a scam. He asks some really bizarre scam question like, you go back to, it's a videotape and you go back to the resurrection, find out it didn't happen. How does this change your Christianity from here forward? He asks a lot of questions like that. When I was on his channel, he asked me basically, if you felt God was evil, would you still be a Christian? If you felt God did sentence everybody to hell unfairly, would you still be a Christian? It's not a real question. It's not even a gotcha question. It's an incoherent question. He does that a lot. What he thinks he's getting by that, I don't know. But he does that a lot. Asks these cuckoo land questions. questions that don't even make sense. If God were evil, would you still worship him as God? I swear to God, things like that. If black were white, would you use it to paint your house black, or would you use it to paint your house white? Huh? Oh, look at how he dodges and disseminates. What? I swear to God, that's what he does. You heard me? If black were white and white were black, would you use it to paint your house black, or would you use it to paint your house white? Keep in mind, this is a yes-no question. Just a yes-no question. Just answer the question. The question doesn't make any sense, Doug. Nobody ever just goes, dude, that question makes no sense. It's incoherent. If God were evil, Craig, would you still worship him as God? Yeah, good question. Now that my head has exploded, I swear he does that. I'll go into it. I'll break down his analysis with Randall Rouser, because that was like from another planet. It was so mind-boggling. He basically bends over backwards to give no Christian no quarter ever, to have no common ground with their worldview at all. Bends over backwards, even when he's got Christians that he can find common ground immediately. Scholarly fiction wouldn't do that. He does it in a debate, sure. In the context of a debate, it's different. It's a contest. You're trying to win. Why on earth are you trying to win when you're interviewing someone on your channel? Why are you trying to win? Why are you trying to make every conversation zero-sum? Ask only loaded questions, so you never understand anything they have to say, never listen to the answer, so you just, basically manhandle them for an hour. That's what Aaron Rod does. That's what Pine Creek does. Doug does. Pine Creek Doug is a little more skillful at it, to tell you the truth. Aaron Rod's the more famous atheist, but Pine Creek Doug is a little better at it. He is. It's a little more sophisticated intellectually. It's subtler, but it's still the same thing. He manhandles someone for 45 minutes. Doesn't look for any common ground. Doesn't look for any way to relate to them at all. Just tries to undercut everything they think they believe. Asks only loaded questions, tries to lead them to a foregone conclusion. Why? Why do that? Even out of the words out of his own mouth, you should always look up and down for a defeater. Why? See, scholar's fiction's behavior is more consistent with the things he says. So when he has a Christian who isn't quite triggered out, I sincerely doubt if scholar fiction had Laura Robinson on his channel, he would do anything other than have a conversation. I don't see anything he'd disagree with her. He'd let her have her religious beliefs. And not be like, I got to make sure I go on record to prove to you and all my audience that your religious beliefs are fake. It's also a tell, by the way. There's a couple of really interesting things about this. That's why I'm going to go over this a lot. First of all, the question is why. It's not consistent with what Aaron Ross says he believes. It's not consistent with what Pine Creek Doug says he believes. It's ideological. It's not rational driven. It's not rationally driven. It's not A equals A. This is the most logical thing to do. And in the case of Aaron Ra, he totally disregards evidence that doesn't comport with his already preloaded worldview. Why? Why? What difference does it make to him? Why has he already decided somewhere deep in his heart, in a place that can barely be reached, that it's really important to him that he spends all of his waking hours disparaging religion? Got to play guessing games at it, because they're not telling you the truth. They're not telling you the real reason why. And all of the atheists who are evangelical atheists to some degree or another, this is what I'm getting at, where the apologetics aren't the real thing. Why? Because they're not telling you the real reason why. The real reason why is mysterious. What on earth does Aaron Ra care so much about religion? Why does he foam up in the mouth about it every time he wakes up? Consistently, all the time. People make fun of when you say, who hurt you in the church? But that's the most logical, who hurt you in the church? Who touched you when you were 5 years old that was a preacher? That's the most logical reason. There's got to be some form of psychological payoff. Anytime anybody does something that's really either inconsistent with their own worldview or inconsistent with reality, there's a reason they're doing it, and there's some form of psychological payoff. It's not just random behavior. Why does a flat earther think the earth is flat despite despite the fact that it really obviously isn't? Don't know. Never really sat down with flat earthers to try and pick their brains and try and understand them. But there's some form of a psychological payoff. There's some reason they're doing it. Now, with most atheists, you don't have to play guessing games at them. Why? Because their worldview is consistent with their behavior for the most part. For the most part. The only part with like a normal atheist, like a Shannon Q atheist, or not objectively damned, but most of the others, is I'd say they're very incurious about religion. Too much so for people who make videos all the time about that deal with God or not God. They never look into comparative religion. They never actually look deeply in religion. They never go to anybody that can actually help solve any of their objections. There are a lot of in-betweeners out there that would be totally palatable to atheists, and atheists would resonate with them 100%. John Vervaeke is one. You know, Jordan Peterson was one too. And instead of recognizing, like, oh, he solved some of these problems, they started inauthentically seeing him as an enemy. Why? Because he solved some of the things that they say are their core objections. That's the point. Why do that? If somebody's coming and solving the core objections, why don't you yield? Why do you double down and keep fighting? I'm not sure if this is making sense exactly how I'm saying it. So in other words, Skylar Fiction, if Laura Robertson appears on the show, this is a guess, I never saw her on the show, but my guess is he put his sword down, as he sort of did with Dry Apologist. He wouldn't try to debunk, dismiss, discredit her for an hour and a half. He'd just talk to her. Why? Because a lot of the things that she believes are the same as things that he believes. So he'd see her more as a peer and an ally than an opponent. Shannon sometimes does that a little. She's more evangelical atheist than, for example, Brett. You know, she's never trying to debunk, dismiss, discredit as she's having conversations with people. But I'm not sure she ever sees a Christian as a peer and an ally. Maybe Laura Robinson. Maybe that's the sole exception. Doubt even with her. Pine Creek Doug and Aaron Ra, they represent a good 40% of how most atheists actually engage. And they don't give you any quarter at all. They're just in the business of trying to debunk, dismiss, discredit you. Why? It is not consistent with their worldview, is my point. At all. Shannon is consistent with their worldview. She doesn't believe in God. She doesn't think there's enough evidence for God. Fine. I just think it would serve her better to be more curious about religion overall, to start looking at people like Karen Armstrong, John Vervaeke, people that could actually like really open her eyes to you know, she calls herself an anti-theist, so she owes it to herself to start investigating those people. Really open her eyes to different aspects of theism that she hasn't thought about. Comparative religion, why people engage. There's a complex phenomenology involved in religion. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not so simple that you can just write it off. I'm not saying that's what Shannon does, but that's what a lot of atheists do. Why? Because they don't really want to investigate it in any way that's scientific, for example, like a scientist would. They just want to debunk, dismiss, discredit it. The question is why. The question is why. Why are Aaron Ra like that? Why is Pine Creek Doug like that? You know, and 40% of most of the atheists. That's what I think the real thing is. Find out what the real objection is and we'll solve the whole thing. Keep pretending like it's what they say it is. Oh, you know, if the Bible, the Old Testament didn't endorse slavery, I'd be all on board. Baloney. Baloney. Oh, okay. Find out what the real objection is. Find out why there is such a thing as an ideological atheist. It's a lot more mysterious of a phenomenon than people think. Technically, there shouldn't be any. Technically, there shouldn't be any. Why? Because it directly corresponds, it directly contradicts what usually their stated worldview is. There are facts about religion. You don't have to believe in God to start examining religion as a neutral observer, which is what a scientist would do, which is what an atheist should do, because that's what they say they're all about. Being an objective, neutral observer. That's what I want to be. That's what they say. It's not what they are. So a scientist examining religion, that's why I say science is on my side. Why? Because science doesn't have a dog in the fight when it comes to religion. They just want to explore the phenomenon in its complexity and figure out what's actually going on. They don't necessarily have a position, there's a God or not a God. They just want to figure out what's going on. Why do people act this way? Why have they been doing it for thousands of years? What happens when people pray? If it doesn't, they don't connect with the sky fairy, Craig, that's for sure. Okay, that's not what a scientist would say. What is actually happening? What are the knowable facts about this? Very few atheists are actually curious in a holistic way about religion. They just want to grab onto a little piece of it so they can debunk this little piece. They don't want to examine the entire phenomenon. Same thing with the Old Testament is what I was talking about. If you're a rationalist looking at the Old Testament, you want to deal with it holistically. Not, here's a couple of scriptures here, and they're so terrible. Look how this proves an agenda. That's not rational thinking. That's not how scientists think. That's not how anthropologists think. That's not how anybody with any sort of academic credibility thinks at all. They try to deal with the facts. They try to deal with things holistically. That doesn't mean that they believe in God. That doesn't mean they believe I, Craig, am connected to an ontology. It just means they've explored the whole thing with neutral as humanly possible, trying to correct for their own biases, which no atheist ever do, not very many atheists do, trying to correct for their own biases and try to explore the phenomena non-judgmentally, non-emotionally, so they could just get at the essential facts. Very few atheists do that. 20% of the atheists do that, and that's a high estimate. All of the atheists should be doing that. Why? Because that's perfectly consistent with what they say they're about. So why don't they act in ways consistent with what they say they're about? That's what a scientist would do. So why don't the atheists act like scientists if they value science so much when it comes to religion? Why do they put a dog in their fight on purpose? That's my point. When we figure that out, we'll figure out everything. Because the individual objections by themselves are not the story. They're just questions. You know, why does the Bible say X? And most of those questions can be figured out by any intelligent person, could come up with a pretty good answer after thinking about it for 5 hours. So the fact that the atheist presents them as groundbreakingly important objections to God, not God, is totally fallacious, totally logically fallacious. Doesn't make any sense. They aren't. So, I don't know, I'm rambling you're rambling, you're all over the place, Craig, fine, whatever. I don't know, I'm on to something big. I'm on to something big, and it's going to be a big part of what I'm talking about. Because once we figure that out, we figured out everything. Figure out what the emotionally compelling aspect of atheism actually is. Because I really honestly don't get that part. I get huge chunks of why atheists are with certain things. I get exactly why a Drew would have deconverted to a point. I get exactly why Paul G would have deconverted to a point. I probably would have done something very similar. Why Aaron Ra is the way he is, no idea. What about religion does he find so emotionally, infuriating that he's angry at it 100 every single waking hour of the day? Why? That's the part I just genuinely don't understand. And when we genuinely understand that, we will get the whole thing. Why? Because those are the guys who are those are the actual soldiers. The Bretts aren't the ones creating the audience. Those are the ones who have latched on to the parts of the belief system of atheists that are true and compelling and useful. The other ones are the soldiers. The evangelical atheists are the soldiers. They're the ones creating other atheists. Why do they want to do that? They're the ones we got to figure out. And they aren't about apologetics. Because you solve some of their objections, they find new and more devious objections. The question is why. Swear to God, that's true. You solved. That's exactly what happened with Laura Robbins. She solved some of Pine Creek Doug's supposedly key objections to Christians. She solved some of them in her very approach to Christianity. He finds new and more devious objections. Why? Why? And tells her straight up, you should be looking for a defeater. Why? There's something really mysterious here. Once we figure it out, we'll figure out everything. Why? Because those are the evangelical atheists, guys. Those are the ones who create other atheists. A lot of the others are neutral. A lot of the people who listen to me are neutral. They have integrity, which means if you tell them the truth and you convince them it's the truth, they'll believe you. The evangelical atheists won't. Why? Because they're not about the truth. I don't know what on earth their agenda is, but it ain't truth. That's my point. I don't know what on earth their agenda is, but it ain't truth. It's ideological. They are committed to a mythological construct. What that mythological construct is what we should be trying to figure out. So, there you have it, kids. That's how I see it. That is all for now. The Mass is ended. Go in peace. Go in peace. Go in peace. Go in peace. Go in peace.